Also, some people argue that Oogway already sensed evil in him, so it was neither of their faults. But of course, what was it that turned him bad? Oogway saying that he wasn't the Dragon Warrior. Sort of going back on the theory of self-fulfilling prophecies. But still, you really don't put that sort of pressure on a child, as it always has nasty consequences later in life. And people really can't say Shifu didn't build him up too much, because the number one example in my eyes being his own name. Seeing how when Shifu found him there was no note, so we can only assume Shifu gave him that name. And of course Tai Lung translates into English as Great Dragon, meaning that Shifu has literally been building him up to be the Dragon Warrior since he was that tiny. Oh, I guess Oogway was right, he was destined for evil. With Shen, you do feel sorry for him, and you almost understand why he does what he does. But I think with Shen it comes down to the fact that, forgetting all else, he's basically a deranged sadist. You just watch him carefully at a few points during the film. Every time his eyes just widen, his pupils and irises dilate, he looks completely mad. There's quite a few occasions he has that twisted look in his eye. To the point where I'll admit it's actually kind of creepy. Yes, Shen is a very creepy character when he wants to be. You just look into those eyes and you know he's not messing around. Tai Lung is a lot better at explaining why he is, and is determined to prove the other person wrong, whereas Shen is the same at some points, but otherwise he just doesn't really care about public opinion. That, and Tai Lung gets a little bit more justification because, when I think hard about it, he just isn't evil at all. He just had a really lousy lot in life. Don't believe me? Well, let's sum up his life story, shall we? He gets abandoned as a baby, is raised to be a warrior, trains very hard all his life to the point where it's its main focus. His hard work gets thrown back in his face, he loses his temper, gets locked in jail for 20 years, having to endure what I can only imagine is a very painful imprisonment, gets tormented and patronised by the guards, has an emotional confrontation and nearly kills his adoptive father, and finally gets 7 bells and of course gets killed by a panda, to which, if it wasn't for the cinematic rule of villains always lose, he would have won. In fact, if you're asking me, the first film should have ended like this. Of course, I'm kidding, but still, if I went through all that stuff, I would have the same psychotic look in my eyes as well. Tai Lung, this is your life. At least when Po beat Shen, it was probably his crowning moment of awesome, and you were glad to see him triumph. Because of this, I have heard many fans are really quick to label Tai Lung as the true Dragon Warrior when they talk about him. And oddly enough, the writers, while making the first film, were really worried that they were making Tai Lung way too sympathetic. And in a way they did, because it's proven to be both his strongest point and his biggest flaw. I've discussed that we become so enraptured in Tai Lung's side of the story that we feel a bit too sorry for him. The filmmakers tried to fix that by simulating a quote-unquote massacre with this brief flashback scene, but Tigress only said he laid waste to the valley, which in my mind means they just wrecked some stuff. And they never make it clear that he ever actually killed anyone, and he never kills anyone during the course of the film, with the possible exception of the rhinos, and he does come close to on a couple of occasions. So I would have preferred it if they made that a lot clearer, otherwise it's pretty vague. And since they don't, we don't get the feeling that his crimes were so terrible enough for him to deserve the punishment he got. Looking at everything he went through, I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. But luckily they totally improved on that with Lord Shen, because while he also had a sympathetic past, on the other hand he was extremely cruel and a mass murderer. And at times we still had that element of fear against him, and at times he was creepy. In fact, one popular argument that Tai Lung fans love to bring up is the fact that when he was fighting the Furies 5 on the bridge, he could have easily killed them, and it would have made no difference.
I thought we could stop him.
He could have killed you.
Why didn't he?
So you could come back here and strike fear into our hearts, but it won't work.
But surely wouldn't have killed them, done that job even better? So clearly that was something he did by his own choice. Also, a lot of people forget that tiny detail that Tigress is basically Tai Lung's adoptive sister, seeing how they were both orphans, both were raised by Shifu, and grew up in the Jade Palace, despite the fact that he clearly didn't have any hesitation to strangle her on the bridge scene. So when Tigress was growing up, she knew Tai Lung very well, After all, how else would she be the only one to know all the details of his backstory like that?
So where is this dragon warrior?
How do you know it's not me?
You? You forget, I was there at the beginning, when you were just a young cub. Are you the favorite now?
In fact, at times the two of them seem like complete mirror images of each other. Tigress was also called a monster in her youth, despite being completely innocent. And she also acted completely cold and nasty when she was denied to be the Dragon Warrior. And at times, it seemed she could turn dark at any moment. You just see those little moments where you know she's almost going to snap. But thankfully, Tigress is still the opposite reflection, because when Shifu first met her, he taught her how to control her immense strength and ferocious temper, which is pretty much what saved her from turning evil, and it was something that he should have done with Tai Lung in the first place. After all, as much as I love Lord Shen, I will admit that he was, and I've said this quite a few times, he was still evil, and despite the sympathy I do feel for him, he still pretty much deserved what was coming to him. Tai Lung, on the other hand, was never evil enough to deserve it. And actually, to Ian McShane's credit, I'll admit, just by looking at the behind-the-scenes footage, I can tell that he was having an absolute blast when he was recording his lines. Which is always great to know, because when we know that the actors themselves are having fun, it helps us to come along and enjoy the ride with them. And whenever he does a role, especially a villain role, he often really has fun with it. Most likely because he admitted himself that he likes scaring the abstract daylights out of his grandchildren, but hey, you just try and tell me you don't like doing something similar. And Ian McShane stands out to me because, like Aldrin, he's had a lot of villain roles, but when Ian talks about villains, you can tell that he knows what he's talking about. He's definitely studied hard about these types of characters.
Well, we don't call them Batman anymore. We call them complicated characters. Thank you. Interesting people with difficult childhoods, is the way I like to put it. Not bad people. No.
It almost seems like me and him both have a PhD in villainology. Also that, and both actors can be pretty attractive when they're not being absolutely terrifying. But of course it comes down to who is the more badass, who's the better villain. Well, to me, I will always defend the fact that Shen is the better villain because he's just so much more surprising. Because, well, you look at Tai Lung, you find out what he is, and instantly you know he's going to be cool. Because after all, snow leopards and just big cats in general are always going to be awesome ass kickers. Peacocks, on the other hand, not so much. You would never ever think that they would actually be interesting outside the fact that they just have gorgeous feathers. That's all they're really famous for. And I will shamefully admit that I went towards this film without the biggest of expectations. I mean, Lord Shen has everything against him. At least he did. He's a peacock trying to outdo a snow leopard. He's a sequel villain, and he's a sequel villain in a DreamWorks film. And then, of course, I was eating my words by the time I got through the first two scenes, and after that I threw any ideas of nitpicking completely out of the window. Not only that, but turns out DreamWorks surprised us all by making the film itself absolutely phenomenal, kicking Disney's teeth that same year as they released Cars 2, a sequel to a film that was already regarded as one of their worst, and my BF, just for the sake of curiosity, watched it, so I didn't have to, and simply texted me back, Cars 2 was the worst film I have ever seen. And believe me, this poor girl has sat through some painful stuff. Especially since DreamWorks have been Disney's biggest rivals in the film world ever since the company's creation, and the CEO of DreamWorks, Jeffrey Katzenberg, used to work for Disney and was partly responsible for the Disney Renaissance. DreamWorks had recently been the subject of ridicule due to many of their more recent films having a running formula of crowbarring A-list celebrity voices for their characters and adding in pop cultural references just for the sake of it. The first Kung Fu Panda film surprised and impressed a lot of people and showed that DreamWorks was starting to break away from the formula that everyone had gotten wise to. And in my opinion, Kung Fu Panda 2 had perfected that, and I can see DreamWorks studios coming back to their prime like they did when the company first started out. And that is what makes Shen so great. He came out of nowhere just like the company and completely surprised us. We especially weren't expecting much because if you look at the adverts and various trailers that show you a sneak peek of him...
This year, our greatest hero will have to face the most diabolical villain the world has ever seen.
A peacock?
They make fun of it. They totally don't hesitate to take the mick out of the fact that the main villain in a summer blockbuster is a peacock. which I'll admit is actually kind of clever, because of course when you come to watch the film, he completely knocks your teeth out. And come on, I bet you can all say that when you found out the film was going to be a peacock, you giggled, just a little bit. And that is the key to Shen's success, in my opinion. Throughout the entire film, Lord Shen just kept doing something in the film in order to shock us again and again. That is one of the many things why he's a bigger badass than Tai Lung. Also with Tai Lung, they kept building him up as you heard the characters boasting on how bad and evil he is throughout a majority of the film before we got to see him.
Yeah, we're not really supposed to talk about him.
We have to do something. We can't just let him march on the valley and take his revenge. He'll...
Guys, I know about Tai Lung. He was a student, the first ever to master the 1,000 scrolls of Kung Fu.
1,000 guards and 1 prisoner.
Yes, except that prisoner is Tai Lung.
But with Shen, they just show you the character and let you decide for yourself. That's a lot better done. Now, some may argue that Tai Lung is the bigger badass, seeing how he actually knows Kung Fu, whereas Shen is far more reliant on his cannons. But I have to disagree, because even without his cannon, Shen is shown to be very skilled with many other weapons. And at times he just doesn't even need weapons. He's just so smart, and some of the things he says are just so nasty, and he's just such a great manipulator, that he's enough to make anyone feel the size of a bug. Like I said before, just look what he did to Master Croc and Ox. Also, Shen is a great martial artist as well. After all, he isn't wearing that black belt for nothing. So to sum up, I'm agreeing with many of the fans when I say that Shen beats Tai Lung hands down, or to beat paws down, or even wings down. But anyway, oddly enough, a couple of responses from critics say that they prefer Tai Lung and say that Shen is the weaker villain. That is, they say that when comparing their species, I'll admit that. Which I find a bit strange because, after talking to many people online, many of them say the opposite response. Myself and many of the fans agree that Lord Shen completely blows Tai Lung out of the left field. After all, I never would have thought of making a documentary for Tai Lung, despite how cool, awesome, badass, scary, complex and surprisingly sexy he was. However, I have heard people who still prefer Tai Lung over Lord Shen, and that is more than cool, because in my opinion, choosing between Lord Shen and Tai Lung, or even just choosing between Gary Oldman and Ian McShane, is like choosing between chocolate and vanilla ice cream. Both are great flavours, and it's virtually impossible to say which one is the more popular flavour, which one's better, but there is no way you can criticise someone for preferring one instead of the other, and if you like both, well, how can you not? But just don't ask me to say who would win a fight between the two villains, because I will say, just thinking of the idea of two of my favourite villains going head to head in a battle would probably be the coolest thing I have ever seen in my life. So my points go to Lord Shen, the superior villain and bigger badass, because if you're stupid enough to rattle this bird's cage, he'll have your sorry ass pleading for extinction. Now, for all you fans, I think it's only fair that I end this part with some Tai Lung trivia. For starters, Tai Lung's name may already mean Great Dragon in simplified Chinese, but his name is also a tribute to Tai Lung, an actor who starred in many of the Shaw Brothers martial arts films. For the voice of Tai Lung as a young cub, the director Mark Osborne got his 6-year-old son Riley Osborne to play the part. So cute. Even though I already mentioned that Tai Lung gets a passing mention in the second film, you actually can sort of see him as well. If you can remember the final fight scene from the first film where Po whacks a wok into his face and he gets his face imprinted into it, you can actually see that same wok again in the fireworks factory scene. It's on the conveyor belt that's going into the furnace, and if you look very carefully you can see it right there. When designing the markings on his face, the design was not only taken from real-life snow leopards, but the character artist, Nicholas Marlette, made it to resemble the slightly creepy-looking Chinese theatrical makeup as the main inspiration. And finally, in the wild, snow leopards have actually been recorded to hunt and eat pandas just like Po, and even red pandas just like Shifu.